Welcome this evening. It's nice to see everyone. I hope you all had a chance to enjoy We Are All in This Together, a film written and directed by Dr. Paul Newman, who is one of our guests this evening. Dr. Newman is a professor of history. This is his 27th year of teaching at University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. He is also a local actor of stage, screen, and television. He's a writer and director for the Bobcat Films Corporation or company, and we are excited to hear some of the after show discussion that he has to share with us. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Newman.
Thank you very much.
We also have Kate Davis. She's a local actor with her Master's of Fine Arts from Savannah College in Art and Design in Media and Performing Arts. She is also a member of Bobcat Films and has been frequently seen in Stackhouse Park doing the Summer Shakespeare in the Park. This year they're doing Richard III. Auditions are May 15th at 6 p.m. on the Tioga Street Pavilion in Stackhouse. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
And we also have Matthew Bequeath with us, a graduating senior from the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, who happens to be attending the Graduate School of Public Health at Pitt for infectious disease microbiology and a Master's of Science in that. Matthew helped work on the project, and we're excited to hear what he has to say. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.
So let's go ahead and start now with you, Dr. Newman. What were the sources that you used to write the screenplay, and what was the research process? How did all that happen?
Well, we wanted to find the best possible and the most possible resources for local history for how Johnstown and Johnstowners dealt with the Spanish flu. And we were fortunate that there were two newspapers of record in Johnstown at the time, the Johnstown Tribune and the Johnstown Democrat, later to merge in the 1950s, but at the time, two separate papers. And we're very fortunate that the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, that the Johnstown Cambria County Library and the Penn Highlands Community College Library all have collections of microfilm of both papers. No one of the three have a complete collection, but between the three of us, we were able to cobble together everything that we needed from 1918 and 1919. And so I just went into September and October knowing that that was the beginning of the epidemic in Johnstown from looking at the records of the Cambria County Medical Society. And I opened late September, early October, and it was just everywhere. You know, there were just story after story. Two stories over and over again every day was the Spanish flu in town and Johnstown and Cambria County young men serving in World War I overseas. And the two stories just seemed to converge over and over again. So I realized very quickly that I could not do this on my own. It was just too much material. I wanted to look at 6-8 months worth of time. And so I immediately contacted you and I said, I need to round up some students. I'm gonna ask history students, could you see if any biology students are interested? And we came up with 10 student volunteers, Matthew's one of them, that we could not have done this without their incredible work. Every student got a month's worth of papers in which they had to use, well, I won't talk about that process. I'll let Matt talk about that later, but they had to go through a month of papers and find stories related to Spanish influenza and then to record them, not just the title and what date and what page they were, but to really write about these stories so that we could create a database of sorts for me to collect material. And so that's what we did. And I started to work with their material and wrote a screenplay from there.
Well, that's very interesting. I would also like to remind our viewers in the webinar and on Facebook Live that you're welcome to ask questions of anyone here in the panel and of their experience in working on this film. So please do so if you have anything that you'd like to ask Dr. Newman or Kate or Matthew. So Matthew, it seems like Dr. Newman mentioned about some of the research that you did here briefly. So what was it like peeking into the history in those old papers? Did they crumble apart? What happened?
Well, although they were old, it was pretty easy to view them because it was done over the microfilm reader, which was something I've never used before. I can't say I've ever even seen one before. If I have, I definitely didn't know what it was until this year. But it was very it was an experience. I mean, it's something I'll never forget, being able to look at the the papers, just the style, the way they were written, even the phrasing, it was just constructed entirely different than anything that we view today. And to see those stories that were written back then and read them today was just like embracing yourself in that time period. I mean, it was like you were there reading, or you could imagine yourself reading that paper that morning that it came to your door or that you received it. I mean, it was very eye-opening and it very interesting to see like how similar a lot of the things that were happening then are also happening today.
Yeah, that's exactly true. We are definitely seeing parallels between the two pandemics. So,
You know, Matthew, when I read the same papers, and I have a feeling you had the same experience, and I do this with all kinds of historical research, but especially things like this and stories like this, I felt emotionally connected to these people. You know, I mean, it would hit me, some of these stories, and I'd have to sit back and take a deep breath, you know, before I read the next story.
Yeah,
I
it
don't know
was.
if you felt the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I got the tail end of the pandemic were the few months that or the month that I was examining, and I know it. A lot of the stories that I were reading weren't as impactful, so to say, or as emotional as like some of the first or right in the middle of the pandemic. Those stories may have been, but I know I read a lot about like rescheduling of events that had been put off for a year and a half, and I was like, well, we know plenty about that. That's been happening.
so that brings us to Kate. How did you study, or who is Kathleen O'Cready Wissenschaft, and how did you build her character? Did you look at some old microfilm? What were your influences?
Sure. Well, I really tried to look at, I trust, the script that I was given because it's kind of the world that I work within. So relying on that, also trying to focus primarily on, her development, more of the social, you know, rules and things that she would have, that would have maybe dictated some of her behavior and her posture and what she does. So I was really focused more on, kind of building up her context as a middle class, um, person living in Cambria City, and what would have been important to her. What are those things in the script, especially that that she needed to respond to and react to really kind of get the full breadth of who she is, because that's so much of it is, I mean, I know she talks, she's the talker of the show, but a lot of it is listening to that world, and reacting to that world as best she can. Understanding that she's an immigrant, that she came to this country when she was about 12 or 13 years old. So there is that little flavor of Irish still present in her world, but still, like, I mean, Cambria City being a melting pot of communities, and knowing that they would have, she would have seen that very handsome German Mr. Wissenschaft and just, not been able to help herself, certainly. But also just dealing with the pressures of what she wanted to be and who she wanted to be versus what she became, and lamenting that in some ways. I thought it was an interesting, just personal component that came out, especially in episode 1. Also her costuming, knowing that she did a lot of she was a seamstress, and if anybody was noticing the beautiful pleating on that blouse, on the arms of that blouse, one thing that was, with sewing machines coming into the homes, and right around that time it would the pleating foot was actually coming into popularity, and so they were pleating everything. And so I thought, and we see that shirt a couple times in over the 4 episodes, but that would have been a real point of pride for her to have a white blouse and to have all of that pleating down the arms. I thought it was just a really great way of kind of showing off her work in a nice way.
That's wonderful. I know that there were a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of foreshadowing that was happening in this particular episode. So showing us, giving us that little tidbit is quite nice. I hope that we have some of our Facebook viewers and our Zoom panelists here asking any questions about those. But we do have our first question coming in for Dr. Newman. What were some of the personal stories that you wished you could have included in the film that you couldn't due to time? Some of the things that the students had found in their research.
Is there a way you could let me share my screen to answer that question?
I absolutely can. There you go. You're good to go. So
2. One would be the Fraser family that we just barely got in a later episode. 3rd death in Fraser family, triple funeral. Daughter of Walnut Grove pair who died, expired today at Memorial Hospital. Mother died on Friday, father died on Sunday. Small child died on Monday, and they were preparing a triple funeral for them. And in the story, there were only 2 children left, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. Here's the next day's paper. 4th member of Fraser family dies of influenza. Just a small child remains. And the story I would like to include is a story I don't know because there was no follow-up after this, is what happened to that last child who was also sick. This family likely disappeared. And I'd love to know about this family too. This is an amazing story. 4th death in the Lupus family since Saturday. Mother and 8 other children, now influenza patients at Municipal Hospital, came here from Mexico. So these are Mexican immigrants into Johnstown who came in probably in 1917 or earlier in 1918. The Cambria Steel Company brought in workers from the South, African Americans from the American South, but also Mexican immigrants across the border, and brought them to Johnstown as laborers in 1917 and 1918, because when the war broke out, many young men in Johnstown were swept up in the draft, and that's something we saw in the newspapers in September, October, and in early November, was every paper with a draft roll and a draft list and who's on the draft list. And so a lot of Johnstown young men were being sucked up by the draft, and Cambria Steel was faced with the need to constantly produce for the war effort. So these people came from Mexico, and here the father has died, 3 other children, 8 children still alive, a mother likely doesn't speak English, living in Johnstown, and her whole family's dying on her, you know. Just an incredible story, and I'd love to know more about it, to tell more about it. And so the research will continue. I've got other students who are coming on who will be continuing this kind of research, and I'd like to learn more for sure.
So that leads us to a good question for you, Kate. What was it like acting with other characters who weren't actually there? Was it challenging, liberating, or maybe a little of both?
I'm not, film is not where I began. I'm more of a stage actor. So there were some rules that you don't usually want to look at the camera, and you don't want to usually, it is good to have that other person to interact with. I have done one-woman shows before. So that part wasn't strange to me, being the only person on stage. I had talked to my mom about it because I'd asked her to watch it, always. And she had mentioned it was, the thing that was strange for her wasn't the fact that it was just me. She's seen that a million times, but that there was no one interacting with me. And she's used to like at least audience members or something like that being there to feed off of and to kind of grow from. So that's one of the hard things, obviously, is that it's your energy in the room. I mean, and obviously the crew's there, the gang's there to kind of snicker or smile at you, you know, that helps. Certainly there to make sure that Paul's happy with the performance. But and even like things like handing the newspaper to me. I mean, you know, and
I know about that. Yeah.
Jill was there with the paper for me, but I wanted to look at Jill, who was handing me the paper. I didn't want to look at the camera and thank the camera for handing me the picture. Took a couple takes to get that right, you know, just those little quirky things that you know, that you don't always think about, but looking into the camera that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I have great respect for the fact that I kept pointing up. I remember pointing up.
Yeah.
Go to the camera. So
my face is up here, you know?
yeah, my face is not here, it's up here. So that's a good question for you, Paul. Why did you write it for a single actor? Like, was that challenging? Did it?
Well, if people don't like it, I just blame it on my producer who said, that's all we have the budget for is one actor.
Hey there.
If people don't like it, I say it's the producer's fault. But if people like it, and this really is the real answer, because it was proposed to me, well, maybe it could be one actor, maybe it could be 2 or 3 or 4. And I kind of like the idea of one actor because I think about our experience and I think about the influenza experience in 1918 as both being very isolating experiences, where people lived in lockdowns, they lived in quarantines, they separated themselves from family and friends and workplaces and churches and schools. And there is a loneliness to it. I mean, even being locked down with family members there, you know, I've had a fine time being locked down with my wife. We get along really well together. We had a nice year, but man, I miss my children and my adult children. They're all adult children, and I miss my family and I miss my friends, you know? And so to have a single character with other characters around her, I think is a nice symbol for what this thing kind of is, but yet she is reaching out to these other people around her all the time and they're reaching to her. And even though we don't see them, you know, they're gathering strength from one another. So that's the answer I give to people who like the movie.
Well, that brings me to you, Matthew. Was it lonely sitting in the room looking through all of those microfilms? And did you find anything in the articles that were not about the flu? Anything that stood out otherwise?
There were, well, first, it was slightly lonely, but it was still, even being able to leave my dorm on campus was a treat at all every time. And it was the library staff they were wonderful to interact with. They're always super sweet. They let me into the room. And I did find a couple of different things that weren't necessarily influenza related, but were in the same realm maybe. But I noticed like towards the end of the pandemic, there were a lot of like advertisements for treatments or like remedies that were to prevent or even cure the flu, and or even if it was any sort of medicine, influenza was marked in all of them. And it was almost like a lot of these companies were taking advantage of the situation to market their product even more. And it was just like, wow, like really interesting.
And that will show up in later episodes. Your work will show up, trust me.
It is definitely there. So Kate, what did you bring to Kathleen that was a little bit of you?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I would say I brought a lot of my family with me. I having grown up being Irish and German, essentially, to really coming from a very domesticated world. Myself, I feel like she felt very natural to sink into. And even like a lot of the props and stuff were were family heirlooms of my family's. So it was really nice to bring
Scissors.
historic scissors and things like that, and giving those you know, some presents there. And two, I think, you know, as a mother and a wife, and you know, dreams and aspirations, I really, you know, I really can respect, you know, Kathleen's worldview and her attempts at, you know, running the house, you know, the way that she does. I there's a lot of me in that too, I'm sure, as I'm like, you know, getting everybody from point A to point Q throughout the day. You know, I'm definitely the driver of the family here with how we, you know, get to everything that we need to get to. You know, and I would say too, like, this is kind of an issue. Matthew had brought this up before about, like, as things kind of open back up, having been in a lockdown for a year, and I haven't performed, and I've really just kind of shut the door on that whole thing until Paul asked me to do this. And I didn't know, I felt like I didn't know if I could, you know, like, how am I supposed to walk back out the door? I've been trapped for so long, you know, and not trapped, but like not able to perform, not able to do, you know, the craft of performance, and except for at home with the kids, and that part's fun. And we, you know, but I really had to trust that they trusted me, and in being able to kind of rejoin the art of performance again. So
Yeah,
Can
absolutely.
I piggyback on Kate?
I just wanted to remind our viewers that they can ask questions, so please do so if you have any. Go ahead, Paul.
There's two, I think, from Facebook right now, but let me
There's
piggyback
only-
on this
There's
if
just
you don't mind.
Mhm.
You know, when I asked Kate to do this, I asked her just after you talked to me about it, Jill, and
Yeah.
offered me the opportunity to write a screenplay. And I said, well, I know who I want to work with, and I'm going to call her right away. And Kate said yes immediately. We started doing the research, pulled out a lot of things. I developed a story arc. I started writing character for her and for all of the people around her in the film, and even their parents and grandparents. Like, I wrote a universe that went back 60 years, but I wrote it all around Kate and who I know Kate is, everything I've seen her act in, which is many, many, many things. And it was so easy for me to write what I knew Kate could do. And then to see her pull this off in such a powerful way over and over again was just an absolute treat. You know, I'll never forget it.
It was very, I thoroughly enjoyed being on the set, watching you work, Kate. It was,
oh, thanks. We have a good time, don't we?
we sure
Yes, we
did.
do.
So Paul, one of our Facebook viewers has a question for you. One of the Portage cemeteries has a memorial dedicated to the 100+ individuals buried in a mass grave due to the Spanish flu. Did your research discover any information about this incident?
Oh yeah. So the flu hit Pennsylvania first in Philadelphia in mid-August, and it made it there from Boston. It went down from Boston to Philadelphia on a train, and it came on trains from Philadelphia to Cambria County. In the end of August, Conemaugh Hospital sent about half of their hospital staff, doctors and nurses, to Philadelphia to help with the epidemic that was happening there. All the hospitals there were overrun. Meanwhile, troops from overseas were so infected with influenza that they were being removed from Europe and brought back to the United States. They were coming to a camp outside of Boston, Camp Devens, and they were huge number of cases there. By early September, about 20,000 in Camp Devens alone, and they couldn't deal with it. And so the Army sent these people to their homes and literally just sent the disease out into the United States. And so the people coming to Western Pennsylvania had to travel to Philadelphia first, and then from there on the Pennsylvania Railroad across the state. The first cases hit in Cambria County about the 20th of September, and they hit all along the main line. You can watch them come in boom, boom, boom. So Portage hits about 2 days before Johnstown, and it's Johnstown by the September 23rd. By the end of the month, you're starting to see stories there. And the Portage, it's just a nightmare. Whole families dying in 24 hours, doctors dying, and it moves through Cambria County, moves down through Johnstown and out the rail line out to Pittsburgh. But then once it reaches Johnstown, it moves up, right? The B&O line that headed up into the county to take coal out of Ehrenfeld and then Spangler, Barnesboro, Culver, Revlock, right? And it just goes through these little coal towns and it just eats them. And so what happens in Portage in late September, early October, by mid-October, Spangler and Barnesboro, 80% of the community has the flu in a 3 or 4 day period. Deaths are just happening. It's just unreal. The people of Spangler and Barnesboro together lose all of their doctors. The mayor writes a letter to Johnstown begging for help. It gets printed on the front page of the Tribune. But Portage has the same story. Just horrifying, absolutely horrifying. So yeah, if you look into late September, early October, you'll see story after story about what's going on in Portage.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And that brings me to you, Matthew. I know that you're going to graduate school of the Graduate School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh. You're going to be studying some infectious disease microbiology. So how do you see this film and the project that you've been working on fitting into any of these kinds of campaigns? Like, how can those stories that Paul's talking about transfer to today?
I mean, just the whole idea, especially what was conveyed in the episode that we watched today, how the phrase "embrace science," how the community needs to embrace science, I think it was important then, and it's just as important today. And I think it's one of the biggest subjects or topics of public health that we need to work on. So I think that this exact film is a great, dramatic but accurate way of portraying how important it is that we need to embrace everything that the scientists are telling us, or we will repeat history.
Exactly. I would like to remind our viewers in the Zoom and on Facebook that you can ask questions. In Zoom, you can use the question and answer feature, and on Facebook, you can type it in the comments. So back to those little Easter egg nuggets, Paul. Do you care to share one or two of those with the group today?
From what was the eggs that were laid in today's episode? Or?
Yeah, the little Easter eggs that we've got going on for today's episode. Anything?
I don't want to do that. I don't want to give it away. The whole idea of an Easter egg is to hunt for it.
That is true. That is true. I just was checking. So how about this? Where was the film shot, and why did you pick it?
Okay, and that's a good question that leads to a later hunting issue that I think that you're going to be dealing with. Good idea. So the second call I made after calling Kate was calling Jason, make sure that the gang was all back together, and that was the case. And then the third call I made was to Richard Burkert, the CEO of the Johnstown Area Heritage Association, because I knew instantly that the set for this film had to be the Wagner Ritter House in Cambria City on Broad Street, and 400 block of Broad Street. And really, once I had that too, that really helped develop the story, because, well, the family had to be from Cambria City, and it was the most densely populated part of Johnstown at the time, and the most dangerous place to be when you're in an influenza epidemic. And it turned out to be a very, very deadly place because of that. But the Wagner Ritter House is the oldest house that we know of that people lived in Johnstown. It was built about 1860. And it was there and was a private residence in 1918, and it has already a number of set implements that are a part of it. And then we also use the collection of Jaha. They've got 90,000 objects. And so curator and historian Amy Regan did such a wonderful job of going through their collection and finding just the right implements for us the artwork that's hung on the walls that you'll see, I just said, well, this is a Catholic family and the mother's an Irish Catholic and she's very Catholic. And she said, oh, okay, I know, I've got a relative just like that. I know exactly what you're looking for, and went and found some great iconography, beautiful things. And from kitchen implements to furniture, and the house just has that perfect vibe. And so really, really happy to do that. And that's a place you should visit once they open back up. Students of mine in the public and applied history program are working on tours to give of the Wagner Ritter House. The story of the house and the people who live there is really quite amazing, and people should know about it.
So
what year?
Sticking with you, Paul, yeah, we have a question here in the Q&A. What year did you say it made it to Johnstown? This individual's grandfather recently found out that they died of pneumonia in March of 1920. Could that have been
the flu came to Johnstown September 23rd, 1918. It was the second wave in the United States. That was Johnstown's first wave. It bore through to about March or so of 1919, kind of disappeared for a little while, came back in the summer of 1919, stayed around till early fall, disappeared for a while, came back in the late fall of 1919 and stuck on through the winter of 1920. So your relative who died of pneumonia in March of 1920, it's very possible that it could have been influenza related. In 1918 and 1919, the deaths from the influenza epidemic were either registered as influenza or pneumonia. And scholars that look at it now and try to figure out numbers of dead realize that the two were working hand in hand and that the pneumonia was brought on by the influenza. So I can't say for sure about your relative, but that would have been still within the right time frame, because it wasn't until about April or May of 1920 when the last wave left and didn't come back.
So we're going to be wrapping up here shortly, so make sure you get your questions in. One final question to you, Kate. What part of this episode did you like the best, and what part of this episode did you enjoy playing the most?
Oh, I enjoyed. Oh my, because I think it was all pretty fun. The moment where she's sitting down, drinking her coffee, eating the oatmeal, reading the paper a little bit, I thought was pretty fun to do. And just her getting this is one of the things that she has a chance to react to something that isn't herself, you know. It's pretty fun. And of course, yelling up at the kids.
Here comes the rabble.
That's not very real to me. You know, and even the moment where, you know, she's just like, 6 children. Oh my Lord. You know, just it's a nice window into, you know, just the constant non-stopness of motherhood.
Absolutely. And Paul, speaking of that paper, how did that come about?
You mean the prop?
The prop, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. You know, we cannot thank the Tribune Democrat enough for that. I mean, that is just a dream prop. What I did is you put me in touch with Chip Minnemeyer, and Chip and I talked about it, and he said, well, send me the headlines and send me the text from the newspapers that you want in there that you're going to use, and I'll do filler for the rest, and I'll make it look like a real 1918 newspaper. And so we used this, we had about 60 or 70 copies of it run, and I sent all that to him. I sent them to him the order that we would use them in the film, so that Kate could actually read this 1918 newspaper and use it as a prop. Oh, you've got your copy. Yeah.
Yeah, I got my copy right here.
Yep. Hot off the presses. So, you know, I got to go down and photograph a little bit of it coming off the press. And man, we were so excited. I mean, we had a lot of great props in this movie. Kate brought in like family heirlooms that she used as props that would have been Kathleen's items, which I thought was really great. And I brought some things from my family, like my grandmother's tin is her sewing tin. That I just think is so cool that we have so many of our own family things, but then that paper prop, that was just, oh man.
Absolutely. And Matthew, what for you? I mean, I know that Dr. Newman and I both sent you emails and we asked you if you would be interested in this, but you could have said no. So what drew you to the project?
I mean, wanting to pursue a career in public health, I think it's important to know why we are where we are today, if that makes any sort of sense. I mean, it's important to know your history and just the events of the past and how things have been handled then versus how they're handled now, or if they're still handled the same way. And I mean, it's also it's just relevant. I mean, it's exciting to learn about what professionals, public health professionals, medical professionals did back then to prevent something that is so similar that's happening today, especially whenever it's happened before and it's something that you're super excited and super interested about, that I want a career in. I mean, I couldn't pass it up. It was just it was for me. It just felt like it.
Well, that is.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Absolutely. We couldn't have done it without you. And one of our Facebook viewers, Kate, mentions that they liked your line, tall order indeed. They enjoyed that line a lot.
Yeah, there's some that's a favorite too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was an excellent way to end the episode, is to talking about how we need to embrace science, and hopefully this this endeavor will allow us to do so. Any final thoughts from anyone on the panel?
Watch the next episode. It gets more and more interesting.
Yes, and speaking of our next episode, it will be airing there'll be three more installments airing every Thursday at 7 p.m. They'll be debuting on In This Together's Facebook page and their YouTube channel, and following those debuts, there'll be live chats again at 7:30 here on Zoom. So do please join in for the continuation of We Are All in This Together. I'd like to thank Dr. Newman, Kate Davis, and Matthew Bequeath for joining us this evening. And thank you all for watching and engaging with your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye. I was, it's like you've got this baby, you give birth to this baby, and you think, oh, isn't it a cute baby? And then you take the baby to Walmart and people are running in terror.
It is ugly.
What do you
Coochie,
think?
oh my God.
That is a remarkable baby.
All right.